Okay, hi everybody, and welcome back. For those of you that have been tuning in so far to our Learning Impact 2021. This is my third session that I'm involved in talking on out of the first four slots. So, but this is going to be the best, I think. We're here to talk about foundations for curriculum equity. And it's a very important topic for IMS going forward. And we're very proud of some of the work that's been done so far. What we're here to talk about is how we might define curriculum equity and what is needed to set up conditions for achieving it across large, diverse school districts or perhaps even states. I'll be asking some questions of our guests. And if you have a question, you can type it into the chat. And I may be able to add it if there is time. So please don't be bashful. If you've got a question, let us know. Our guest, we're very, very fortunate to have is Dr. LaTanya McDade. Dr. McDade became the superintendent of Prince William County Schools, Virginia on July 1st, 2021. Dr. McDade has 23 years of experience in Chicago Public Schools, the third largest district in the nation. 340,000 students, 638 schools, having most recently served as the Chief Education Officer. Dr. McDade is a lifelong educator. She's a former teacher, principal, Chief Schools Officer, district leader, and she, most importantly, is a passionate advocate for students. Dr. McDade also currently serves as a member of the IMS Board of Directors. We're very fortunate to have her. So thank you, Dr. McDade, for taking the time to join us here at Learning Impact 2021. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Rob, and thank you so much for having me today.
Yeah, our pleasure. So we're going to just jump right in. Recently, at Chicago Public Schools, Chief Education Officer, you spearheaded curriculum equity initiative. And particularly, that's what it's called. It's called the Curriculum Equity Initiative, and it's known as Skyline now. So why did you, in the leadership, we want to delve into this area in quite a bit, and then kind of broaden it out a bit, perhaps. Why did you, in the leadership at Chicago Public Schools, choose a description or focus specifically of curriculum equity?
Well, thank you so much for that question, Rob. I think it's a really important one that K-12 districts across the country should grapple with. One, we recognize that there was wide variability and inequity, quite frankly, around access to high quality curriculum throughout the school division. Even before I became the Chief Education Officer, I remember being a Chief Officer of Schools where I supervised schools across the school district. And I would notice from one school to the next or one classroom to the next, there was so much variability in access to rigorous curriculum that were aligned to standards, and even just the student experience within the classroom and the teacher experience with teaching and learning. We could see very clearly that there were inequities across the board, across the school division, and that simply should not be the case. And the impetus or the genesis for the Curriculum Equity Initiative was to ensure that we stabilize the educational experience for all students within the school division so that every single student had access to high quality curriculum that was aligned to rigorous standards that would prepare them for success and being delivered in a medium that would allow them to be competitive in a global society. So that was the first thing. The second thing I think I want to address is the fact that for our educators, not all of our educators had access to the curriculum that was necessary to deliver, to do their best work in delivering high quality teaching and learning within the classroom. And we know that while there's no one panacea to closing the achievement gap, there's national research that supports the importance of leveraging high quality curriculum and the difference that it makes for all students in raising the bar of expectation. So that really was the impetus for the beginning stages of the Curriculum Equity Initiative. that led to something that it grew into something that we never would have imagined that it could be. But now, even more than ever before, we're seeing the impacts and the positive impacts of having a high quality digital curriculum that currently exists in Chicago.
Well, that's great. And so you mentioned high quality, aligned content, and the term curriculum equity is of great interest these days in both K-12 and higher education, and I'm certain it will be in the future as well. Are those the key essential elements in what you would call the definition of curriculum equity, or is it more about the fact that everyone has access to the similar materials, or how do you think about curriculum equity, both in terms of what happened at Chicago Public Schools and maybe now even more generally?
Yes, we did in Chicago Public Schools, we did some asset mapping, and we did a scan across the school division to see what students and teachers had access to by way of curriculum. And it was very jarring what we found. Beyond the wide variability, there were in some cases core content areas that some schools had zero access to curriculum. Teachers were spending an inordinate amount of time searching the web, looking for curricular resources. And as we know, Pinterest is a great way to find decorating ideas. Curriculum, not so much. But what we found is that, teachers who did not have access to high quality curriculum would go to Google, would go to Pinterest, Teachers Pay Teachers, lots of different places. And what would happen with that is the quality would be in question, in addition to the fact that the amount of sheer time that they spent trying to search for quality curriculum. So when you think about the elements of it, is one, yes, curriculum that is aligned to rigorous standards, that is across all content areas, not a few, where you don't have situations where some students are learning science and some students are not, or some students are accessing grade appropriate content that is, requiring productive struggle where other students may not. So those key elements, of course, but then there's another piece to curriculum equity that I don't want to be lost. And that is the piece about cultural relevance. When you think about our world today and the way that we should embrace and be proud of the diversity of our country, the diversity within our school districts and our classrooms, we have to ensure that our classrooms are spaces where students both see themselves within the curriculum as well as the world around them. So students should have a sense of identity in the content that they are learning. So curriculum that is culturally relevant is critically important, along with the fact that it should be rigorous, it should be aligned to standards, and it should be available across all content areas.
Wow, that's a great add there, the cultural relevance piece. We had a keynote earlier today from Yang Zhao, who's a scholar in education, educational systems, and he was talking about, he didn't say it in terms of cultural relevance, but he basically said it in terms of the ability for students to activate themselves, activate their own self-interests, right? Because learners are driven, by their own intentionality in terms of what they're trying to do in their lives. So thank you for that. So how is that Chicago Public Schools program going? You're no longer there, but we know there's a great team there because we've worked with many of them in IMS. So what do you see as the accomplishments of that program to date?
Well, there is a lot happening. And even though I'm not there, I was able to see the launch of the curriculum before I left Chicago Public Schools, and I'm incredibly excited and proud about that. That was a work of the heart that spanned over several years, 3 to 4 years, honestly, from inception or, first idea to the final iteration where it was ready to go out the door. And so one thing I will say that it did launch July 31st, the full suite of curriculum did launch. thousands of teachers have been trained on both content as well as the technical system for delivery for the digital ecosystem. And I would say across all of the schools, it's accessible for pre-K to 12th grade for the core content areas as well as world languages. So a lot has happened to date. And, you know, I'll also add that some of this is iterative. We're learning as well because, you know, this was all a hypothesis. And so there was no blueprint that existed prior to Skyline, right? So some of this was having to learn. I know that before I left, we did have a very robust group of teachers that essentially served as advisors to support the development as well as our content teams that were underway. So it went through several different cycles and iterations of revision before it went out the door. So I think that the school division is in a good place right now in terms of launch, and the demand for it was high. One of the key things that I want to note that I think is important to note when we initiated and when we delivered CEI when I was in Chicago, this was something that was what I consider supply and demand. We did not mandate and say, okay, we're developing this curriculum and everybody, you know, you're just going to have to use it. We partnered with EdLab. We partnered with Ed to be able to make sure that we created a rubric to be able to evaluate for quality. And we had a teacher collaborative who worked with or was trained by National Ed Reports to be able to utilize that rubric for evaluating curriculum. And so that was critically important. And I just think that where they are today, not only are they in a good place where everyone, when I talk about supply and demand, teachers knew that the quality was there because of the way that it was developed, the use of the rubric. And when we surveyed teachers across the board, more than 80% of teachers said that this is something that they needed. Quality curriculum, especially digital, that's a one-stop shop within the CPS technical ecosystem, was something that teachers wanted and desired. And over 50% of the teachers that were surveyed, you know, talked about the lack of curriculum within their classroom. So an important thing here was to make sure that this was something that was needed and in demand, but also having teachers sign on to say this was something that, you know, that they wanted in their classroom, which has led to now, I think the rollout with training from the last check, because I keep telling CPS I'm checking in on them to make sure that this moves forward in with fidelity of implementation. But at the last check, they had a good problem, and that problem was that they wanted to kind of roll out in schools slowly some of the content, but teachers and leaders were like, no, we need this and we need this right now. And I think especially the rollout of it was so apropos because of the timing with COVID and, you know, virtual learning, et cetera. So it's a good problem to have for the Curriculum Equity Initiative, or Skyline, I should say, to be in demand and having to keep up with the demands and training. But I think that's a good issue.
Right. You certainly could have predicted COVID when all of this, when you started working on this project, but the timing has been pretty interesting. So you mentioned some key ingredients there. You know, we all know that technology is not just about technology, or digital curriculum is not just about having a bunch of curriculum that's digital, right? Or whatever. It is about that supply and demand, and you mentioned the teachers and having the committees and so forth. What else? Are there other key ingredients that you felt? I know, I mean, personally, I'll have to say I was very impressed just with the sort of top to bottom kind of coordination of the effort from where I sit, which is very limited. But what what would you say as an insider in terms of the secret sauce, you would tell other people to make, something like this succeed?
The Big Mac sauce, like I said earlier, there wasn't a blueprint for this. And so I think what's important to note is that we began with research. So it started with researching other school districts and looking at, what was happening from the digital space, as well as in development of curriculum. And even I mentioned National Ed Reports earlier, and looking at some of the research and reports that came out about curriculum, where we saw different states try to do whole curriculum adoption. So we did a lot of that background homework and research, if you will. And where we landed was with a hybrid model. And so when you talk about what do we have to do, the secret sauce of trying to bring everyone together, this was a huge change management process, a huge continuous improvement infrastructure that we had to build within the school division, ensuring that everyone was working together. What we learned was from those school districts that we researched that tried to build curriculum on their own, it took them upwards of 5 to 10 years to build that. And oftentimes it was only 1 or 2 content areas. And so we just knew that was just going to take too long. That wasn't possible. And then in the other space, it is efficient to just adopt core curriculum like what most school districts do, but that didn't allow for the insurance of it being culturally relevant, and the insurance that it was totally customized to meet the student body needs, especially as we look at the diverse needs of our English learners, our students with special needs. We in Skyline, we also took into account modifications and accommodations. We also looked at customizing for social emotional learning. So there were a lot of customizations that we wanted. This was a competitive bid process, so there were a lot of moving pieces with that. I'll add, there were so many people that said to me and to my team, like, you all are crazy. You are not going to be able to pull this off. How are you going to get publishing companies? Because honestly, our publishing companies had to work together with our teacher collaborative that I talked about earlier, and with our content lead teams within the school division. So this really was convergence at its best. And there were 2 things that came out of it. We decided to first go with a hybrid model. We knew that it would take too long to build curriculum ourselves. And then 2, we knew that customized curriculum, readily available off the shelf curriculum was more efficient, but it wasn't customized. It wasn't necessarily culturally relevant. So we went with a hybrid where those who bidded, who competed for this, knew that they had to agree to 2 things. One, that they had to customize a portion of their readily available curriculum to the tune of about 25%. So 25%, that's important, of it was customized. And then secondly, they had to agree, the publishers had to agree to disengage their content from their proprietary platforms and centralize all of our curricular resources within the Chicago Public Schools technical ecosystem. So those were the 2 big bets that came out of that. But really it was about how we brought together through a continuous improvement process from the visioning of this and communicating to the entire school district what the vision for the Curriculum Equity Initiative was, and how we got both our operational arm of the house and the educational arm of the house to work together towards convergence, as well as working with the vendors, the publishing companies, and EdTech tools, because we launched along with, I think one thing I didn't mention earlier when you asked how it's going, we talked about the training, we talked about the content being available, but we also were able to launch the CPS technical ecosystem throughout this. And so that was huge. Okay.
Now, so hybrid, and I'll just clarify for the audience. So by hybrid, you mean a combination of off the shelf and tailored or customized content, right? Okay.
Right.
And I think there is also an element in the program of the school districts, or the individual schools, I should say, themselves being able to use, customize or tailor their use of the content. Is that correct? Is that part of the plan or the program?
Yes, and that's one of the reasons why having a technical ecosystem was so important, why integration was so important. And so teachers can, take lessons and modify lessons, and then those lessons would actually be housed within the ecosystem where teachers across the school district could access those lessons. So if they made modifications or accommodations, it would be available to all teachers across the board.
Right. Right. Okay. So kind of the add back phenomena there, make a
Exactly.
change, add it back. Very good. So we already have a great question from the audience. So that seems to fit in pretty well nicely in this point. Where did you see the biggest blocker for making a digital curriculum successful?
Oh,
Biggest blocker. That might have been something you've already talked about, but I don't know.
There were actually quite a few. It's a couple of things. One, there's always with any continuous improvement process or change management, we know that there's some changing of hearts and minds that has to happen, right? So some of it, when I remember that I made mention of visioning. This was not something that we could just say, hey, this is great. We know we need to do it. Let's jump on it. Let's do it. You have to bring people along and you have to build buy-in for this. And so the visioning part was huge because you had some individuals that believed, even within if we start internal and go external, if you look at just the school district side, me as the chief ed officer, I had to work really closely with our chief information officer. And it was a give and take, right? He had to build up my knowledge and understanding of the technological infrastructure within the school division. And then for me, as basically the client, the educators as the client of the CIO, I had to make sure I helped him to understand the educational aspects and what the user experience needed to be for the teachers and for the students. That was number one, right? Bringing those two sides of the house together where there was a common understanding of the vision for Skyline and for CEI and how the technological ecosystem would need to work in order for this to be successful. The second thing that I think is challenging is, I would have thought that you could have bought me for a penny if you would have told me that the ed teams, would have found some of this challenging, because I would have said, oh no, we're ready to go. But like anything, I think there's a lot of misconceptions about what technology integration is and should look like in the classroom. And there were some mindset shifts that needed to happen even with our content teams and working with the publishers and really understanding what a digital curriculum is, what it should look like being student facing as well as teacher facing. That was a huge hurdle. And then making sure that there was alignment with the content, with the training, and with the digital learning that needed to take place. So it was a huge undertaking. I think one of the most challenging aspects beyond all of the continuous improvement pieces that I just named is, the competitive bidding process and bringing together so many different vendors and publishing companies together with a single standard and expectation. And so we had some great partners in this, but the contract for this was massive. And so that component was challenging as well, getting those contracts over the finish line.
So maybe that's a good point for me to ask maybe a bit of a self-serving question here as the IMS CEO. And how do you feel Chicago Public Schools team was able to leverage the IMS membership?
The IMS membership was critically important for us because all of our integrations were driven largely by IMS standards. And so building out, we would not have been able to launch our technological ecosystem without the IMS standards. And so that was huge. And I'm really proud to say that I brought IMS to the school division. And that goes back to the conversation that I mentioned earlier between me and the CIO and sitting down and really visioning for this and building out the path forward and understanding what would be necessary. And that's how we became an IMS member, because we recognized that in order to have the kind of integration that we needed within our system, we would needed to leverage IMS standards.
Right. And I'll just note that if I remember correctly, because I did visit visit Chicago Public Schools at one point, but that was quite a few years ago, right? That was probably near the beginning of the whole
Right,
thing, right? Yeah, yeah.
right.
So you were thinking well ahead along those lines. It's important for people to know this because things, as magical as standards can be, they don't just sort of snap into place like
They don't.
overnight, right?
It's a
Right.
process.
It's a process, right? And but it's very. I tell you, I feel so proud of what you've done. Just because of our role in it in IMS. So how about, there's a lot of words people use, to describe where they think education models should be going: personalized learning, student-centered learning, pick your favorite one. But is this curriculum, so this is rigorous content, aligned to standards, but do you feel that this curriculum equity initiative also in some ways supports those goals, more of the kind of the personalized learning or student-centered learning, or do you have any thoughts on that? Is that
I
part of curriculum equity
I do.
as well?
I think a big part of curriculum equity is recognizing, a student-centered environment and how our students learn and how they engage in the classroom that is representative of the world around them. Understanding that digital citizenship is important for students to be competitive in a global society, and recognizing that the way that you and I probably learned in the classroom should not be the image of what we see in the classroom today, with so many of the advances that have been made, not just with technology, but in education. And so, when you think about Skyline, it brings those worlds together, that students are engaged in learning through a medium that is natural to them. I always said, whenever I would talk about the vision for Skyline, I always talked about the fact that our students are digital natives. When you think about going to the doctor's office and seeing a 2-year-old, sitting on their parent's lap, usually they're in the waiting room with a device, right? So that's their world from the time they come into the world. And so when they go into the classroom, their classrooms should not look different from the way they interact with the world around them. So yes, absolutely. The first and foremost priority is ensuring that students have access to quality, grade appropriate curriculum that is aligned to rigorous standards, that is culturally relevant, that gives them a sense of ownership of their learning, agency and authority in the classroom, and affirms their identities. But it also should be the type of curriculum and engagement that is delivered in a medium that meets their needs in the way that they learn, not just in the classroom, but in their world. So that's what makes Skyline so important. It was critical for me to make sure that we didn't just have a digital curriculum that was downloading PDFs, right? Like that's just essentially, paper that you're printing out now. But that it was interactive, that it was student facing, that there were playlists, that there are opportunities to meet students where they are, while at the same time accelerating learning and allowing students to have ownership of their learning. Some of the elements of that, yes, is personalized learning, but a lot of the direction that we're moving forward with in terms of innovation in education, I think now more than ever before, we're seeing the space in which the digital curriculum is so critically important. The timing could not have been better. Even before we did the launch, we had already bought content through Safari. We had bought content lessons for teachers to utilize while we were going through the building of Skyline. And so when the pandemic hit, it was wonderful that we already had digital content available that the teachers could access through our technology ecosystem. So, I think that there are advances that have been made in education. I don't think that we should be looking to go backwards. We should be looking to continue to innovate and move forward. And that old saying of never let a good crisis go to waste. I think there's a lot of good that came out of the pandemic, and it really illuminated so many things, including the digital divide that now so many different school districts are trying to grapple with and address.
So in many ways, you were before you really went full bore, you were piloting kind of the ecosystem idea, and what the using Safari in this case, and what the teachers had to be able to do to take advantage of a core curriculum, but yet at the same time customize it or tailor it, or however you want to think about it, and whether or not they were capable of doing that, if they liked doing that, if that met the how they wanted to teach and so forth. So in some ways you were sort of doing a little piloting of certain aspects of this while you were building out the larger buy-in as well. At least that's what it sounds like to me.
That's absolutely right. And who would have known, that the pandemic would have hit in March, and so we were just we felt so ahead of the curve when that happened, in preparation for what we know is happening now and will continue in education in the future.
We're getting a lot of good questions from the audience now, so I'm going to preempt some of my questions for those. Here's one that probably is on the minds of a lot of the school district leaders. Did you face any political hurdles, or were there any parental concerns over the curriculum?
No, I think, yes, there were hurdles, but the latter part about parental concerns, no, we didn't really get, a lot of parental concerns, keeping in mind that even as we were building out our technology, our technological ecosystem, we made sure we were aligned to SOPA standards, and making sure that we were protecting safety, digital safety within the school division. And that's where my CIO came in, and he was my trusted advisor in making sure that we covered all bases in terms of security and protecting data, et cetera. I think the politics came in the contracts. So, we're talking about Chicago Public Schools is the third largest school division district in the country. And so these are pretty hefty contracts, right? When you think about being able to deliver licenses, et cetera, for over 340,000 students, that this was a huge undertaking. And, it was a competitive bidding process, and then going through the process of it being adopted by our board. It was a $135 million project. And so therein lies the politics, but it was worth every single penny. And when you do the math on per student, what that comes out to be over multiple years, there's huge returns on that investment if we are preparing students to actually graduate and realize the vision of the school district for students to be ready to access college and career upon their departure. Then it was worth it. It's going to pay for itself over time, and then some, in the positive impact that it will have on students' lives for a lifetime. I think about some of the data that came out of the Opportunity Myth, the TNT report, where it talks about what happens when students graduate and are not prepared to access rigorous coursework in college, and end up having to take remedial courses. They're 70% more likely to not persist towards obtaining that college degree, and being saddled with debt. For those students who have to take remedial courses, they usually accumulate $3,000 more debt than those students who do not have to. So when you think about some of the data and the research that has come out around this, absolutely, some of the politics and some of the challenges that we face with having to deliver on a project like this was absolutely worth it, because ultimately it's life-changing for the school division and students and teachers long term.
So I when you mentioned the contracts and the size of the contracts and so forth, the other thing it made me think about is the folks at Chicago Public Schools are going to kind of learn as they go here, right? So there was this idea of meeting this baseline, but in some ways, now you're operating at scale, right? And now there's got to be some sort of expectation built in of evaluation, evolution, right? So I'm thinking about your teacher collaboration, working with suppliers. I know you're Prince William County now, but Prince William Schools now, but but in terms of thinking, there must have been some thinking put into that in terms of sort of the cycle time of being able to learn from what you have and then make improvements over time.
Yes,
What-
and it is cyclical, and we did build that in. So we did build in as a part of our contracts an evaluative piece. So we evaluate the fidelity of implementation as well as outcome, and thinking about the fact that when we launched the technical ecosystem, it also allowed us the opportunity to collect data and have data readily available throughout the division district-wide, which we did not have before. So there is an evaluative piece to the contracts, as well as both not just implementation, but also, you know, impact and outcome. So that piece is built into it. The other thing that we did was we didn't just, this was, when I talk about the hybrid piece, I think the one point that I probably left out of this that's really important, beyond the fact that the two things I mentioned about, you know, it had to be 25% of the off the shelf had to be customized, and then, you know, the publishing companies had to disengage from their proprietary platforms to ensure that all of the resources were readily available in the technical ecosystem for Chicago. The other important key ingredient was that two things. One, we erected a Office of Curriculum, Instruction, and Digital Learning that never existed before in the school division. And so that office is responsible for Skyline, all of the training, the infrastructure for Skyline, and the iterative process. So we had curriculum content writers that we brought on as a part of, you know, the structural ecosystem for this. And then with the teacher collaborative, that's a staple that remains. So it is an iterative process, understanding that curriculum continues to change. So with the customized part of the curriculum, our curriculum instruction and digital learning team, our content experts, as well as our content experts within the respective core content area offices, and our teacher collaborative, we're all a part of providing the ongoing feedback to the customization and build out of this. And so that was, and that's why the National Ed Reports rubric was so critically important, because now we have a rubric that determines quality. And so it is iterative, and there will be adjustments and changes. While it's in the implementation stage, we're also using the teacher collaborative. Well, CPS better be using the teacher collaborative and teachers in the field to continue to provide feedback as they use the lessons with students, and then use that feedback to make course corrections, to make enhancements and make improvements along the way. So it's cyclical. This isn't a launch, it's out there, it's on the street, and it's done. There's an understanding that year over year, there will continue to be iterations and improvements along the way.
So now you're in Virginia. At least I'm assuming you're in Virginia, Prince William County.
I'm in Virginia. I officially live in Virginia. I am within the Prince William County family and community now.
Okay, so, and you're superintendent now, so
Yes.
Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
Now, obviously, Prince William isn't as large as Chicago Public Schools. It's not a small district by any stretch of the imagination, but what are the differences you would think, you know, because many of we have about 100 school districts that are members of IMS. None of them are as large as Chicago Public Schools, but there are some that are about the size of Prince William County. So what are your thoughts about you know, this sort of effort and how it might apply to a district, your current district, or district of the size, your size?
One of my hopes in doing this work in Chicago was to make an impact nationally, not just for Chicago. We believe that that Skyline has the ability to be a national model that school districts can tap into. And what we were able to do in working with publishing companies, publishers of curriculum, changed the landscape and what's possible for school divisions in terms of accessing curriculum, as well as how that's done in a digital landscape. And so in Prince William County, I'm fortunate coming into the county for a couple of things. Well, one, you know, because of the pandemic, as a school division, like so many divisions, we now have delivered devices that has allowed the division essentially to go be one-to-one in a short period of time. That's not the way it was planned, but you know what? We got to that end goal very quickly. So I walked into the school division where that's already in place. I think I have a strong team here already that understands the need to have a technical ecosystem within the school division where everything is interoperable and that, you know, that the standards drive integration. That's already an understanding here. When I came on board, we did become an IMS Global here in Prince William County. So a lot of the foundation, I was able to quickly come in and build upon what was already here. The school division recently adopted some curriculum, which it was off the shelf. It is to some extent culturally relevant. And I think the next step right now, and we're working really hard to bring the kind of necessary training to the forefront for our educators, and then to grow from there in the way that we continue to adopt curriculum and ensuring that we continue on this trajectory of digital learning and we don't abandon that. And I think the good thing is that as a result of the pandemic, you know, there's some innovations that we were able to build on here or capitalize on within the school division that sets the foundation for where we can continue to innovate in the space of curriculum moving forward across, you know, all core content areas. Some of the curriculum that's again been adopted off the shelf has been in a particular area like literacy, but a lot of the infrastructure here is built, and again, I have an incredible team that understands my vision, and there's alignment already there. So some of that mindset shift at the internal level doesn't necessarily need to happen. It's more of how do we take that and engage in the continuous improvement process across the school division, encompassing schools and leaders and teachers as well.
Do you feel that curriculum equity, the term curriculum equity, is a call to action then at Prince William or in other districts around the country? My sense is that it is, just so you know my personal opinion, but I was just wondering what you were thinking in regards to that.
It absolutely is. And we just released, you know, this conversation is so apropos in that we just released our unfinished learning plan to identify how, you know, we will engage with teachers, leaders, students, and families around recovery, acceleration, and re-engagement based on the impacts on learning of the pandemic. And one of the things, one of the lead key levers within or priorities within that plan is around delivering high quality curriculum in the K-12 space throughout the school division. So absolutely, I think that, you know, now more than ever before, it's critically important for all school districts to really understand the role that curriculum plays, as well as the role that technology plays as we continue to deliver on instructional needs of our students in this current climate.
Mm-hmm. We only have a few minutes left, and I'd like to ask you, you know that I would love for IMS, our organization has grown a lot, and we're in many school districts now, and we definitely have seen, you know, the sort of collaboration you're talking about in school districts that are effective with technology between the IT office and the academic curriculum office and so forth. And but this area of curriculum equity is something that I'd really like us to hone in on. Our district members, our state members love to share with each other. They love to talk to each other. They love to, and in doing so, they become leaders, not just of their own district, but they become leaders, you know, across initiative across the board. And I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts or tips, you know, as a superintendent now, but as with your experience at Chicago Public Schools, you know, what could we do, or what should we be thinking about doing in terms of bringing together our school districts to talk about this topic and help, you know, a cohort, you know, of school districts move through this type of transformation or evolution, whatever you want to call it. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I do. I think the space that we're in right now is a great opportunity to get the conversation started about, how do you actually approach this, and understanding it's not just something that happens overnight. I think, you heard me say earlier that this was like a 3 or 4 year process, just to get to the period of launch, not perfection, right? And that a lot of it was driven by hypothesis. It's no one blueprint. I'd like to think that now, Chicago is in a place to start to develop what the blueprint really is. And I touched on some of the key elements around, how this conversation starts and the direction that it can go in, understanding that it really is the greatest example of continuous improvement. And with that being said, I think having cohorts of district leaders across all spectrums coming together and understanding that we're not starting from ground zero. Keep it in mind, I didn't say we just started building something from scratch. We didn't start there. So a lot of the work in different pockets is already happening in school districts. It's really about doing some asset mapping, understanding where you are, what the landscape is to date, and bringing together different school districts to kind of collaborate and have a meeting of the minds to identify what transformation could and should look like across different spaces. So I think getting the work that you're doing right now, Rob, and getting the conversation started is important. I think this network with IMS is also critically important. And the more that we can bring school districts together to identify both where we are today and what the future desired state is, I think that there's a lot that we can learn from each other. Even starting in Chicago, everything that I did from the beginning started with me actually talking with other school districts and finding out pockets of excellence and exemplars that were happening across the country, and then bringing that together to create Skyline. So, the work is happening at different levels in different places. We have to start to be a little bit more intentional about how we come together to have not just those discussions, but how we build out the path forward.
Okay, well, we are out of time, and thank you, viewers, for tuning in. Now you know everything that you needed to know or wanted to know about the Chicago Public Schools Skyline Initiative. It does turn out that there's another session actually today on Skyline. I think it's at 3:30, but maybe at 3:45. Take a look at the agenda online and you'll see it. That's particularly from the Chicago Public Schools team. But Dr. McDade, I just want to say thank you for sharing your time with us. We really appreciate your leadership in this area, and we look forward to doing a whole lot more with you and the rest of the IMS members on curriculum equity. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Rob, for this time. Bye-bye.
My pleasure.